Well, welcome to this session. I'm thrilled about this for a number of reasons. First and foremost, by way of background, I spent about 22 years in enterprise IT. So I worked for a single company, which was one of the biggest companies in the world, which was a lot of fun. I had a lot of different roles, and I'm extremely passionate about making customers successful. The other thing I would observe, which is why I'm equally excited about this, is that throughout my career, I don't think I ever experienced a single time when there was a single vendor that gave everything that I needed across the whole gamut of what I was trying to provide. And as you heard in Dave's keynote, and you heard Nick talk about, and you've heard others talk about, partnerships are extremely important. I think the crowning moment of today for me was the Vodafone discussion around the partnership with HashiCorp. And when you think about that from the HashiCorp perspective, having partnerships with customers is extremely important. Having partnerships with our ecosystem, both on the technology side, the transacting partner side, system integrator side, is extremely important. Because I would imagine that everybody in this room who is responsible for some kind of enterprise IT delivery is dealing with partners. So quick show of hands, anybody not dealing with a partner one way or another? Okay, so I think we've set the scene nicely. So I'm joined today by Felix, who is on the far right. Felix is a technical platform architect for Kaidos, which provides the platform operation services to His Majesty's, and I got that right this time, His Majesty. Still sounds strange, doesn't it, if you're English, saying His Majesty. Courts and Tribunal Service, and then by Migara, who is a worldwide solutions architect for Palo Alto networks. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the relationship between Hashi and Palo Alto networks, and why that's important, and why it's all really sort of key to what we're talking about in terms of how we work with others to make sure that customers are successful. And Felix will talk a little bit about the business challenges that he had and the team had within HMCTS, and then how they've approached that from a technical perspective, delivering a joint solution between our two organizations to service the customer ultimately within Felix's world. So I'm going to turn to you first, Migara, if I may, and just ask you, why do we have a relationship between HashiCorp and Palo Alto Networks? What does that look like? And perhaps talk a little bit about how that supports some of the things that we've heard today in terms of helping customers move through that journey of, you know, the kind of the ad hoc through the standardizing through scale of the cloud operating model that we talk about a lot here at HashiCorp. So how does it really work?
Yeah, so our partnership started way back about three and a half years ago. So I wanted to start with, if you had a chance to read through the State of Cloud Strategy report that got released yesterday, a couple of things there. Multi-cloud is here to stay. It's not going to go away. And number one success factor for this platform approach or multi-cloud journey is security. That's key for success. So this is where both of our organizations start partnering up to provide the best of breed solutions. So if you look at HashiCorp cloud operating model, where now you suddenly have multi-cloud, and then all these platforms team starts to evolve. So you got tools to provision, secure, interconnect, and run. So how we can bring best of security into that cloud platform model and seamlessly integrate and provide best-in-class security for the customers. So that's how this partnership started. So today we have a couple of core use cases for our customers. Before I jump into that, I just wanted to also highlight our investment into the Terraform provider ecosystem. So when customers think about building platforms, naturally what happens is these platforms interact with infrastructure components. In this case, it could be a firewall, it could be a SaaS solution where you want to consume security, or load balancer, whatever you want to call it. So it's super important for us as a company to invest publishing these providers so our customers can easily configure and deploy our products using Terraform. So that's how things started. And now going into those two core use cases, you have Consul to interconnect applications and services. Tom talked about earlier, defining intentions. So you don't have to really go and rely on traditional firewall rules. So that's great. However, there's a common denominator here, right? So we still use the network. So the network's attacks still going to be there. It's not going to go away. So you still need to provide some next generation firewall security. If you look at traditional attack vectors, attackers would infiltrate one of your servers and you would have lateral propagation, and then they reach out to your crown jewels and they steal and exfiltrate data. So it's super important for us to provide some next-gen firewall security. So how can we do this? We don't want to rely on IP-based security policies anymore. So we have a use case where we can consume the information, loads of information coming from Consul servers, and use that information to dynamically push policy updates to the firewall. So you don't have to really raise firewall requests, rule changes. It will automatically take care of it. That's a very high level 10,000-foot overview on that use case. The second thing is multi-cloud infrastructure as code. A lot of customers want to codify their deployment. Now, the key challenge here is you test something and there can be some misconfiguration, whether it's intentional or unintentional. The problem is you test it, move it to a test environment, and then you move it to a production environment. Now, it's really important for us to catch those problems earlier in the life cycle, because if you look at the history of the breaches and things like that, if you actually accidentally push these misconfigured resources to the public facing applications, what happens is you have a massive breach, and you hear about Revel, one of the worst ransomware attacks, or it could be a simple thing like having public access to an S3 bucket. So how we can, as Palo Alto, collaborate with HashiCorp, integrate with Terraform Cloud. First stage of defense would be HashiCorp Sentinel, and how we can integrate purpose-built platforms like code security modules from Prisma Cloud to catch these problems. And then the second part is how you can actually have the governance and compliance. A lot of leaders are really keen to understand about supply chain attacks these days. All the governments across the world coming into the scene and saying, hey, this is our framework to secure you guys from these software supply chain attacks. You have to be compliant to these things. And then also, a lot of developers use a lot of open source tooling. So it's really difficult to really decode these licenses sometimes, because you can pull in one of the open source libraries and you might be in breach. So how can you actually make sure that you're compliant to those licenses and things like that, software bill of material? So with Prisma Cloud Code to Cloud, the module, you can have that all compliance in one place. So those are the two main core use cases we work with HashiCorp and those customers have success with.
Okay, fantastic. So in summary then, so we have a 3+ year relationship. We have engineering guys talking to each other. We have product guys talking to each other. The two main use cases, just to recap on that then. So we have Consul Terraform sync, essentially, which is kind of a day 2 thing for changes that we see in the environment. And also, which I think is an important topic today. I've heard it quite a lot today about left shifting. So that's been a theme for probably the last couple of years. We talk about left shifting, whether that's in software supply chain or moving further left in terms of static or dynamic code analysis, all the kind of things that you'd expect to see in left shifting. But also now what we're saying is that, as well as Sentinel for policy as code, we're actually tracking accidental or in some cases deliberate, which I think we shouldn't overlook, right? Because we saw some examples earlier on about what people do sort of on the inside and insider threats for those who are fans of security, equally, if not more likely to happen than outsider attacks. And so, whether it's accidental or whether it's deliberate, whether it's malicious intent, working with Terraform, working with potentially run tasks in Terraform to use Prisma Cloud. So that's how we tie the things together for the use cases.
Yeah.
Excellent. Felix, Sounds like you've been a busy man. So first and foremost, as you take a breath, I'm going to just read off here while I tell you what HMCTS does, because this was actually eye-opening for me. I've been very lucky not to have to be put before a court in the UK. So I didn't really know what HMCTS actually did, but I was fascinated with it. So I wanted to read it to you so you get an idea of what the organization does. So HM Courts and Tribunal Service is responsible for the administration of criminal, civil and family courts and tribunals in England and Wales. The organisation employs 17,000 staff and operates from locations in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Since 2016, the organisation has been modernising our justice system to make it more straightforward, accessible and efficient. Our ambitious programme is designed to improve courts and tribunals for both those who use them and for those working in them. Our vision for reform and our modernised services were critical to our response during the pandemic. They enabled us to provide access to justice for those who needed it. So it's kind of cool, actually, isn't it, above anything else? But so you think there's a couple of things in there that really struck me. Number one is that, this is an organization that's been around probably longer than all of us, right? So, it's obviously gone through different phases of modernization, both from a people, a process, and a technology perspective. It's clear that there's a vision and a mission for the evolution of the service to benefit civilians and others within the confines of England and Wales. And it looks like you're in charge of it all, Felix, as far as I can tell. So just from a business perspective, maybe before we get into the technology. So obviously, since 2016, there's been a modernization program. I would imagine that modernization includes the three things that we always talk about: the people, the process, and the tooling or the technology. So just maybe set the scene a little bit. What does it mean for the modernization from a business perspective? And, what are the goals for HMCTS as it relates to the application of technology in the projects and initiatives that you're part of?
Thanks, Winston. I think you talk about risks, costs, people as well, and speed. You want to be able to deliver services to the public quickly. You wouldn't want users to go online trying to access a service and it's not there. And you want to protect data as well and all that. So it's moving from that sort of either traditional or slow model to a more modern, fast, risk, safe sort of model. And so that when the general public or users of the system need something, need a service, they can get it quicker, sooner than having to wait or having to have issues. And there's a lot that goes on in the background to make that possible. But that's sort of the direction. How can we move quicker? How can there be less risk? How can you also manage risk as well? Because it does happen sometimes.
So I guess it's fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that sometimes governments are challenged with cost. Sometimes governments are challenged with change, just generally. And when I think about what you provide as a service within HMCTS, I think the availability of those services, we're actually talking about people's lives here, right? In one way or another, whether that's through family law or through criminal law. And I don't know if I'd want to be waiting for a system to come up when I had a problem that required HMCTS. So if you think about the project and the initiative and the sort of the lifespan of it, what are some of the challenges that you've seen? I don't know whether I should say this publicly, but I will. But governments are not typically the fastest moving organizations either, because of those constraints that you typically see. So if you put that all together, what are some of the challenges that you've had, both organizationally, technically? You think about day zero from when you got involved to kind of where we are now with day two, with some of the things that Migara talked about. Could you summarize some of the challenges that you've seen and how you've sort of adopted the change internally?
Yeah, so I'll sort of paint a picture talking about, say, 12 firewalls across 2 regions, across 3 environments, all trying to both protect data and provide service to the public as quickly as possible. How do you put such a system up, manage it, maintain it in such a way that it doesn't become the bottleneck between users being able to access the system, and you don't have a platform team that is bogged down by issues, because we've got a firewall that sits in between the public and the backend services. How do you make that as efficient and risk averse as possible?
So let's think. I'm trying to calculate 2016 to 2023. So 7 years in. I would say. I mean, I've luckily been involved with lots of different transformations over my career, and what I've noticed in most of them is that they don't end. And when people talk about cloud being a destination, I kind of look a little bit sort of sideways at that, because yeah, sure, it's a destination for certain migrations, for certain workloads, but if cloud is going to be the way that we deploy technology and we adopt technologies and we deliver services in the future, then by definition it will continue to evolve and there will be no end. So I'll put you on the spot a little bit. So from where you are now in the project, overcoming the challenges that you have, where do you go next? What are the next big things that you have to work on to continue to evolve and deliver the services? Because I'm assuming that there's no end. There may be end of individual projects or parts of the overall project, but what are the big things that come next?
So it's to improve automation, and pretty much everything is in code, because when you've got your configuration in code, then you can easily adapt. You can easily change. You could easily bring up machines, tear down machines. You could scale out. You could scale in. So for us is how do we automate, and that's where Palo Alto comes in, and that's where Terraform comes in as well, because we automate everything using Terraform and configuration as well, and that makes the team more agile. We're quicker to respond, and if there are issues, we can quickly roll back. For example, say you have a big team of engineers all working together on a project, and say there's an incident of some sort. You don't want to roll back everything, because whose change stays, whose change goes. When everything is in code, you can say, okay, fine. At the time we had the issue, this was the problem. Just roll back that small change. So it's easier when everything is in Terraform code, because you could just say this change, roll that back, and you're back to the state before the issue, the incident happened. Then you can review and find out, what caused it. So having that automation, very, very light, being able to move quickly, being able to get small changes across. And because everything is properly automated, once it's been approved, once you've had all the necessary checks, reviews, and you merge, for example, in PR, everything goes straight to production. So you don't have all these gates and all these sort of barriers that make it sort of difficult to get changes across to production, which obviously it's going to impact the service that is being provided. So automation is the direction.
So we've seen a couple of times today, and I think it was, and forgive me, Tom, if it was not in yours or it was in the Vodafone, but the two words that stood out were ruthless automation, which I think it's a great name for you need some t-shirts, HashiCorp t-shirts with ruthless automation on it. But, one of the things around automation is, and in your very title, it talks about platform architect. So is there a platform team that we would recognize within HMCTS or within Kaidos? I mean, is that what you've evolved to be able to do what you've done? Or are you still kind of early stage? To be honest, I don't talk to many customers who've really have nailed platform teams and platform engineering. So if you're still in process of that, don't feel bad. There's very, very few examples, concrete examples of people who say, we've done it, it's optimized, we don't need to change it ever again. Because by definition, that's also an evolution as more and more automation opportunities and more refinement opportunities come in. Where are you with the sort of the platform team and what you've built relative to the services that you provide?
There is a dedicated platform operations team. And we sort of, the developers sit on top of that, so they don't have to worry about the platform. We make sure that all the infrastructure that is needed is up and running, and they can just carry on with their daily work. So yes, there is a very mature platform operations team.
Fantastic. So, Migara, back to you. Obviously, you know Felix well, you know what they've done really well. You must also interact with other customers. So this HashiCorp relationship with Palo Alto clearly plays out in other parts of the world, in other customers. Are there some examples that you can, you don't have to, I won't put you on the spot to name names, but are there other examples that you could give where you've seen similar things to Felix, or you've seen things that are slightly different, or just other examples that you could talk to?
Yeah, so what Felix and team's doing is that they do operations still kind of a manual approach, right? You still have to configure your firewall to Terraform. We have customers went the full 9 yards, having your service records on Consul and having CTS. So everything is, first of all, configured day-to operations with Terraform, and then used Consul Terraform sync to push updates as well. So we got customers, a large pharmaceutical company in the US doing this end to end, and one of the largest CRM SaaS vendor. Probably a lot of you guys using it. Yeah, they've done this successfully. Yeah, those are a couple of instances, and another customer, one of the home security supplier in the US as well. So yeah.
So what before I get into ask you about some future things, what kind of fascinates me a little bit in the Palo Alto journey, if I think about Palo Alto historically, it was a company that sold tin, and very good tin with very high throughput, and all the magic was locked up in ASICs and all that kind of thing, very similar to other network vendors. I guess, and again, I'm dating myself here, but I remember the advent of SDN, and then if you guys are networking guys and girls in here, you'll know SDN, and then we got confused because we started calling everything NFV, and then we started calling everything VNF, and then everything was SDN again, and everybody got confused, and it turned out to be that, networking was always software, right? Who knew? But the software was wrapped up in silicon and so on. So what fascinates me is the journey of security, right? So if you think about that from the point of view of, as my apps get more and more distributed, and as my users get more and more distributed, there's a case to say that software versions of things like firewalls, right? So, the next generation firewall, the VNF version, for example, it becomes more critical on placing those firewalls closer to the end users and or the applications, depending on the topology, depending on what you're trying to do. So if I'm reading the tea leaves right here, the things that we've talked about with CTS and the Terraform and the capabilities to be able to pick up something that is an application, i.e. the firewall now, so it's a virtual machine versus a piece of tin, helps me with speed, helps me with agility, helps me with security. So, I'm not very smart, but am I kind of on the right track?
Yeah, absolutely. As a company, that's exactly what we want to do, right? There are multiple flavors of firewalls, whether it's a hardware box or a firewall as a virtual machine running in cloud, or even cloud next-gen firewall, we call it. It's a native service that baked into a cloud provider. So it really depends on the customer and the use case. So wherever they need security, they have that the tools they require to do that. So like you mentioned, the customers or the developers don't have to worry about the form factor anymore. It's just wrapped in infrastructure as code, can be easily consumed. That's the goal.
So I'm going to ask you one last question, Migara. So we fast forward a week, and it turns out that you're now Felix's boss because you've left Palo Alto and gone to HMCTS. That wasn't a prophecy, by the way. It's just for the example. What do you do next? So knowing his environment, knowing what they've done, knowing your technology, knowing our technology, knowing the business outcomes. So you've got one thing to tell him to focus on for the future. What would that be?
I think the natural transition from what Felix have today is moving from day to Terraform automation into CTS. You have application teams deploying applications. Why not incorporate Consul into that? Have that service records in Consul, and then rather than having to raise a firewall ticket to say, right, I updated this application, now I have another server, so please update this IP address. Why don't you have a set of baseline policies and dynamically consume stuff coming from Consul, and then reduce the workload even further down? So that would be the natural progression, the next immediate step.
Okay, fantastic. Well, fascinating from my perspective. As I mentioned, the field CTO organization is invested very deeply in different areas, but our primary concern and our primary goal is to make sure that customers are successful. That we have a bunch of different people with a bunch of different experiences inside the field CTO office, and hearing stories like this are great. Helps us, really understand what's possible. Thank you so much, Felix. I've loved that introduction, and thank you so much. Migara, great insight. Thank you so much. I hope it was useful for everybody else. And the guys have said, even though we don't have time for Q&A, they did say that during happy hour, they can be bribed with drinks to give you more information that they won't share in a public forum. So, Migara, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Felix, thank you so much. And Louise, back to you.